I want you to picture something for a moment. Picture the person you love most in this world. The person you married. The person you built your entire life around. The person whose last name you took, whose family you welcomed into your heart, whose future you believed in completely. Now picture that same person, looking you dead in the eyes, while you are carrying their child and calling you a liar. Not just a liar, a cheater. In front of his mother. In front of your neighbors. In front of everyone you both knew. That was my life, on a Tuesday night in October, when I was 6 weeks pregnant and had just made his favorite dinner to surprise him with the news. I had candles on the table. I had sparkling cider because I couldn't drink. I had a little card that said Daddy on the front with a tiny pair of baby shoes inside. And Marcus, my husband of 4 years, sat across from me, picked up that card, read it, put it back down on the table, and said, "It's not mine," just like that. 3 words, no hesitation, no shock, no joy. Just 3 words delivered like a verdict. And that was the beginning of the most painful, most confusing, most ultimately life-changing chapter of my entire existence. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my husband's demand for a DNA test didn't just prove him wrong, it destroyed everything he thought he was, and it gave me everything I never knew I deserved. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, where the same families have lived on the same streets for 3 generations, and where your biggest drama on a Tuesday night is whether the local diner runs out of pie. My parents were good people, honest people. My father worked in construction for 30 years. My mother taught Sunday school and grew tomatoes in the backyard and made everything from scratch because she said store-bought food had no soul. I was their only child. And I think because of that, I grew up believing very deeply in the idea of family, of loyalty, of building something that lasts. I became an elementary school teacher, 3rd grade. I had 22 kids every year who called me Miss Sarah before I got married and Mrs. Calloway after. I loved every single one of them. I kept drawings they made me on my refrigerator. I went to their birthday parties when I was invited. I stayed late to help the ones who were struggling with reading. Teaching wasn't just a job for me. It was the thing I was made to do. I met Marcus at a mutual friend's birthday party when I was 28 years old. He was tall, confident, well-dressed, and had this laugh that seemed to fill every room he walked into. He was a real estate agent, successful, driven, always on the phone, closing some deal or another. On our first date, he took me to a nice restaurant and spent the whole dinner asking me questions about my life, my students, my dreams. He seemed genuinely interested. He seemed like a man who valued depth. We dated for 14 months before he proposed. It was simple. No flash mob, no big crowd. Just the 2 of us on the back porch of his house on a warm June evening, him down on one knee with a ring his grandmother had worn for 40 years. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We got married the following spring. 60 guests. An outdoor ceremony in his parents' backyard because we both wanted something intimate. I wore my mother's veil. His little niece was the flower girl. It rained for exactly 11 minutes right before the ceremony started, and then the sun came out and everyone said it was good luck. The first 2 years were genuinely good. Not perfect, no marriage is, but good, real. We argued about small things the way couples do. Whose turn it was to do the dishes, whether we should spend holidays with his family or mine, how much money we should put into savings versus spend on travel. Normal arguments, healthy arguments. Arguments that ended with someone making coffee and sitting back down at the table and working it out. But somewhere around year 3, things shifted. Marcus started working longer hours. His phone became something he never put down and always kept face down on the table. He started going on what he called work trips. Weekend conferences, client dinners in other cities, overnight stays at hotels for property showings. I didn't think much of it at first. Real estate is a competitive business. I trusted him. But then I noticed small things. He stopped asking about my students. He stopped sitting with me on the back porch in the evenings the way we used to. He started being short with me, impatient, easily irritated, dismissive of things I said. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself every marriage has seasons. I told myself to be patient. And then I found out I was pregnant. It was a random Thursday morning in late September. I hadn't been feeling well for about 10 days, tired in a way that sleep didn't fix, slightly nauseous in the mornings, off in a way I couldn't quite describe. I bought a test almost as an afterthought, took it before my morning shower, left it on the bathroom counter, and walked back in 2 minutes later. 2 lines. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub and just held the test in my hands for a long time. We had been trying for almost 2 years at that point. We'd had conversations about whether something might be wrong, whether we should see a specialist, whether we should consider other options. It had become a quiet sadness between us, something we both felt but talked about less and less because it hurt too much. And now, out of nowhere, on a random Thursday, this. I cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Happy tears. The kind of tears that come from somewhere so deep you didn't even know they were stored there. I called my best friend Jenna. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then I spent the rest of that day planning how I would tell Marcus. I made his favorite meal, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with butter the way his mother made them. I bought candles for the table. I chilled sparkling cider. I found a little card at the drugstore and wrote "Daddy" on the front and put a tiny pair of yellow baby shoes inside that I found in the infant section while I was there. I set the whole thing up like a scene from a movie, because in my mind, that's what this moment deserved. I genuinely believed that this news, this baby, was going to fix whatever distance had grown between us. I believed a child would bring Marcus back to me, back to us. I had no idea what was actually about to happen. Marcus came home at 7:15. I heard his keys in the door, heard him drop his bag in the hallway the way he always did, heard him loosen his tie while he walked toward the kitchen. He stopped when he saw the table. "What's all this?" he said, not warmly, more like suspicion dressed up as curiosity. "Sit down," I said. I was smiling. I couldn't help it. He sat. He looked at the food. He looked at the candles. Then he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I slid the card across the table. He picked it up, opened it, looked at the baby shoes, read the word "Daddy," put it back down, and then silence. Not the silence of a man who is overwhelmed with happy emotion, not the silence of someone trying not to cry, not the silence of someone processing beautiful news. A different kind of silence. Cold, calculating, like a machine running a program. "How far along?" he asked. No congratulations, no smile, no reaching across the table. "About 6 weeks," I said. My smile was fading, but I was trying to hold it. "Marcus, aren't you?" 6 weeks, he repeated, like he was doing math. "Yes, the doctor confirmed it today. Marcus, we're having a baby. We're finally." "That's not possible," he said. I stopped. "What? 6 weeks ago?" He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, face closed. "I was in Denver, client meetings, the Henderson account. I was gone for 11 days. Marcus, you were not gone for 11 days 6 weeks ago. You were home. We watched that documentary series together on the couch. Remember? The one about. I was in Denver, Sarah. You were not in Denver." My voice was still steady, but something was tightening in my chest. "I don't know why you're saying that, but you were here. You were in this house." He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said it. "That baby is not mine." The candles were still burning. The chicken was still warm. The sparkling cider was still chilled. And my entire world cracked straight down the middle. "What did you just say to me?" I whispered. "You heard me. Marcus." I was shaking now. I could feel my hands trembling under the table. "I have never, not once, not for a single second of our marriage, been unfaithful to you. This baby is yours. This baby is 100%. Then you won't have a problem proving it." Proving it? I shouldn't have to prove anything to my own husband. I want a DNA test. The words landed like something physical, like something thrown across the room. "You wanna." I couldn't even finish the sentence. "If you're telling the truth, you have nothing to worry about. If you're not." He stood up from the table, smoothed his jacket. "Then I need to know." Before I could say another word, the front door opened. His mother, Linda, walked in. He had called her. While I was in the kitchen putting the finishing touches on his favorite meal, while I was arranging the card and the baby shoes and lighting the candles, he had called his mother. She walked in with a face that told me she had already been briefed, already decided, already chosen her side. She looked at me with this expression, pity mixed with contempt, and said, "Sarah, honey, it's better if you just tell the truth." I stood up from that table. I looked at my husband, this man I had loved, married, built a life with. I looked at his mother, this woman I had cooked for, cared for, spent holidays with. And I said, very quietly, "Fine, book the test, because I am not afraid of the truth. The question is, are you?" Neither of them answered. I picked up my purse, my phone, and my keys, and I walked out of my own house. I drove to Jenna's apartment on autopilot. I don't fully remember the drive. I remember the streets were wet because it had rained earlier. I remember a red light that seemed to stay red forever. I remember pulling into her parking lot and sitting in the car for a few minutes before I could make myself go inside. When Jenna opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me inside and put her arms around me and let me fall apart completely. I ugly cried for about 40 minutes. The kind of crying that makes your whole body shake, that makes your chest hurt, that gives you a headache behind your eyes that lasts for days. Jenna held my hand through all of it, made tea, didn't try to fix anything, just stayed. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, I told her everything, every word. The dinner, the card, the baby shoes, his face, his mother walking in the door. Jenna is a very calm person by nature. She doesn't get rattled easily. She's the kind of friend who thinks before she speaks and who gives you real honest perspective instead of just telling you what you want to hear. When I finished talking, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He called his mother before he even heard you out." Yes. He had already decided. Yes. She shook her head slowly. Sarah, something is very wrong here. And it's not you. I moved in with Jenna that night. I went back to the house the next morning while Marcus was at work and packed 2 bags. Clothes, toiletries, important documents, my laptop, a few things that were specifically mine. I moved through the house quickly, not looking too long at anything. But when I was in the home office gathering some paperwork, I noticed Marcus's iPad sitting on the desk. We shared it sometimes for streaming, for recipes, for looking things up on the couch. I almost walked past it, but something made me stop. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Or maybe just the part of me that was done being blind. I picked it up and opened the browser history. And there it was, 3 weeks before he accused me. 3 weeks before the dinner. 3 weeks before any of this exploded. Search after search after search. Can a man deny paternity of a child born in marriage? How to dispute paternity legally? What happens if DNA test shows not the father? How to prove wife was unfaithful during marriage? Work trip alibi how to make convincing? That last one. That last search. I had to read it 3 times before my brain fully accepted what I was seeing. He hadn't suddenly become suspicious on the night I told him. He had been planning this. He had been researching this. He had been building his alibi and his story and his accusation for weeks, before he even knew I was pregnant. I took screenshots of everything. Every single search. Dates, times, exact wording. I emailed them to myself from his iPad and then deleted the sent email so he wouldn't see it. Then I put the iPad back exactly where I found it and left. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with that information, but I knew enough to know I needed to protect myself. The next 2 weeks were some of the hardest of my life. Marcus told people. That's the part I hadn't anticipated. I knew he was angry. I knew he didn't believe me, but I didn't think he would go to the lengths he went to spread what he believed to other people. He told his friends. He told our mutual couple friends. He told neighbors. I started getting strange looks at the grocery store. One woman I had genuinely liked, a neighbor named Carol, who I had shared recipes with and waved to every morning, crossed the street to avoid walking past me. 2 of my colleagues at school heard something through some social network of adults who apparently had nothing better to do, and the atmosphere in the staff room changed in a way I couldn't quite name but could absolutely feel. I went to work every day and taught my students with everything I had, because those 22 children were the one part of my world that made complete sense. They needed me, and I needed them, and in that classroom, none of the outside noise could get in. But every evening when I came back to Jenna's apartment, the weight of it settled back onto my shoulders like a coat made of stone. I called Uncle Richard once during those 2 weeks, just to hear a familiar voice. Richard was my father's older brother, a quiet, private man who had made a significant amount of money in commercial real estate decades ago and lived alone in a large house on the coast. He and I didn't speak often, but when we did, it was always meaningful. He was the kind of person who listened without judgment and said exactly what he thought. The phone rang several times and went to voicemail. I left a message. Something simple. Just said I was thinking of him and hoped he was well. I didn't know that Richard had passed away 3 weeks earlier. I didn't know that his attorney had been trying to reach me. I didn't know that everything was about to change in a way I could never have written myself. The DNA test appointment arrived on a gray Wednesday morning in November. Marcus had booked a private clinic, not a hospital, a private medical facility with a fertility specialist named Dr. Henderson, who apparently did both paternity testing and reproductive health panels as part of a comprehensive package Marcus had specifically requested. I found out later that Marcus had requested the full fertility workup for both of us as part of the package. His reasoning, as far as I could tell, was to further build his case, to show that perhaps there was some medical explanation for why this pregnancy wasn't possible. He didn't realize what that request was going to reveal. I arrived at the clinic at 9 in the morning. Marcus was already in the waiting room. He was dressed sharply, as always. Pressed shirt, good shoes, the armor of a man who wanted to appear completely in control. He didn't look at me when I walked in. I sat across the room from him. I folded my hands in my lap. I kept my face neutral. Inside, I was terrified, not because I had anything to hide, But because I knew that even when the test came back in my favor, I was going to have to look at this man across a doctor's desk and watch him absorb the fact that he was wrong. And I didn't know yet whether that moment would feel like relief or grief or something I didn't have a word for. A nurse called us both in together. Dr. Henderson was a soft-spoken man in his 50s with kind eyes and reading glasses he kept taking on and off. He greeted us both professionally, made no reference to the obvious tension between us, and explained that the results of both tests, the paternity panel and the full reproductive health workup, were ready. He asked us to sit. He opened the folder in front of him. And then the world I thought I understood completely rearranged itself. Dr. Henderson looked at us both over his reading glasses and said he wanted to go through the results in order. He started with the paternity test. He explained the methodology briefly, the way the DNA markers from the baby matched against Marcus's profile. He spoke carefully, professionally. And then he said the words. The results confirm, with a probability of 99.998%, that the man tested is the biological father of the child. I exhaled. Marcus went very still. Not the stillness of relief. Not the stillness of a man who is grateful to be wrong. A different kind of stillness. Like a man who has just watched his entire argument collapse into dust and doesn't know yet how to process the rubble. So, he started. The baby is yours, Mr. Calloway, Dr. Henderson said clearly. No softening. Just fact. I looked at Marcus. He was gripping the armrest of his chair. His jaw was tight. His eyes were moving rapidly, like he was trying to find an exit from the logic he had built and then watch dismantle itself in real time. I expected him to apologize right then, to turn to me and say he was sorry, to feel the full weight of what he had done. Kicked out his pregnant wife, humiliated her to their entire community, accused her of the one thing she was completely innocent of. But before he could speak, Dr. Henderson said, "There is something else I need to discuss with you both, and I want to handle this with appropriate sensitivity." He looked specifically at Marcus. As part of the comprehensive reproductive health panel you requested, we ran a complete fertility workup for both you and your wife. Your wife's results are normal. She is healthy and her pregnancy is progressing well. He paused, took his glasses off, set them on the desk. Mr. Calloway, your results indicate a condition called azoospermia. Severe azoospermia, specifically. This means there is an absence of sperm in your ejaculate. In most cases of this severity, natural conception is considered effectively impossible. The room became so quiet I could hear the hum of the ventilation system in the ceiling. Marcus looked at Dr. Henderson like he was speaking a language Marcus had never heard before. I'm sorry. What? You have a condition that, in nearly all cases, would prevent you from fathering a child naturally. This is almost certainly a congenital condition, meaning you were born with it. It is not something that developed recently. But, Marcus gestured toward me, toward my stomach. The test just said. Yes, Dr. Henderson said. The paternity test confirms you are the father, which means this pregnancy is what we in reproductive medicine call an extraordinary outlier. In cases of severe azoospermia, there are documented instances of spontaneous temporary reversals, extremely rare, medically remarkable, and in most cases, not reproducible. Based on the timeline, it appears that is what occurred here. He looked at Marcus directly. In other words, Mr. Calloway, this baby is yours. And the medical reality is that this may be the only biological child you will ever be able to conceive. Naturally or otherwise, silence. Marcus had gone completely white, not pale. White, like the color had drained entirely from his face and left something hollow behind. I sat in my chair and looked at my husband, and I felt something move through me that was not triumph, not satisfaction, not even anger. It was something quieter and sadder and more complicated than any of those things. I felt grief, not for myself. I had been right. I had nothing to grieve. I felt grief for the version of our marriage that was now permanently over, for the man sitting across from me who had just been handed back the very thing he tried to destroy. His own child, his own legacy, along with the devastating information that it was a medical miracle he may never experience again. He had spent weeks building a case against me. He had humiliated me publicly. He had forced me out of my own home, and the universe had responded with this. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I looked at Dr. Henderson and said, "Thank you." And then I looked at Marcus one final time. He was staring at the desk. He couldn't meet my eyes. I didn't say a word. I walked out of that office, through the waiting room, out the front door of the clinic, and into the gray November morning. And I sat in my car in the parking lot and put my hands on my stomach and talked to my baby for the first time out loud. "You are so wanted," I whispered. "You have no idea how wanted you are, and I promise you, whatever happens from here, you will always know that." 2 days after the clinic, I was sitting at Jenna's kitchen table, eating cereal I wasn't really tasting, staring at nothing in particular, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I had been letting unknown numbers go to voicemail lately because I was exhausted by everything and didn't have the energy for anything unexpected. But something made me pick up. Is this Sarah Calloway? A male voice. Professional. Calm. Yes. Who is this? Mrs. Calloway, my name is Thomas Collins. I'm an estate attorney with Collins & Associates. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks. I have important news regarding the estate of Richard Harmon. I put my spoon down. Uncle Richard? A pause. I'm very sorry if you weren't aware. Mr. Harmon passed away 5 weeks ago. He had been dealing with a heart condition for some time. He passed peacefully at his home. I sat there in Jenna's kitchen and felt something collapse quietly inside my chest. Richard. Gone. I thought about the voicemail I had left. The one he never heard. Or maybe he had heard it, somewhere in those last weeks, and it had made him smile. I would never know. I'm so sorry, Mr. Collins said. I understand this may be a shock. Yes, I didn't know. I pressed my hand against my chest. You said you've been trying to reach me? Yes, Mrs. Calloway, Richard Harmon left a will. A very specific and detailed will. And you are the primary beneficiary. I blinked. I'm sorry? Mr. Harmon had no children and no spouse. He had some distant relatives, cousins, second cousins, but he explicitly chose not to include them in his estate. He had very strong feelings about who he wanted to leave his life's work to. Mr. Collins paused for a moment. He left everything to you, Mrs. Calloway, his entire estate. Mr. Collins, I think there might be some mistake. Richard and I were close, yes, but I'm just his niece. We didn't even see each other more than once or twice a year. I can't imagine he would. There is no mistake. I drew up the will myself, 2 years ago, at Mr. Harmon's specific instruction. He spoke about you at length during that process. He described you as, and I'm reading directly from my notes here, the only person in my family who ever treated me like a human being instead of a bank account. I couldn't speak. The total value of the estate, Mr. Collins continued, including the coastal property, the investment portfolio, and the various business interests, has been assessed at approximately $50 million. The cereal was still sitting on the table in front of me, getting soggy. $50 million. There is one condition attached to the inheritance, Mr. Collins said. Mr. Harmon was very specific about this. The condition was this: the beneficiary must be living independently at the time the inheritance is claimed. His exact wording was that he did not want his estate to become a shared asset in someone else's marriage or financial situation. He wanted it to be yours alone, living independently. I had been living at Jenna's apartment for 3 weeks. Marcus had kicked me out of our home. I was, by any legal and practical definition, living independently. Mrs. Calloway? Mr. Collins said. Are you still there? Yes, I said. My voice was very steady, much steadier than I felt. Yes, I'm here. And yes, I am living independently. We made an appointment to meet at his office the following week. When I hung up the phone, I looked at Jenna, who had been sitting across the table listening to my half of the conversation with increasingly wide eyes. Jenna, I said. Sarah. Richard left me $50 million. She stared at me. Then she stood up and screamed so loudly the neighbor's dog started barking. The meeting with Mr. Collins happened on a Thursday morning. His office was in a tall building downtown, warm wood paneling and real plants in the corners and the quiet particular to places where significant things are handled carefully. He walked me through everything. The coastal house. A beautiful 4-bedroom property I had visited once as a child and never forgotten. The investment portfolio, diversified and well-managed. Several commercial real estate interests Richard had accumulated over decades of patient, strategic work. All of it. Mine. Mr. Collins explained the process, the timeline, the paperwork. He had a team who would handle everything. All I needed to do was sign where indicated and allow the transfer to proceed. I signed for 2 hours. When I walked out of that building, I stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and looked up at the sky. $50 million. A house on the coast. A baby growing inside me. And a husband who had no idea any of this had happened. He found out 3 days later. I don't know exactly how. Jenna suspected a mutual friend who had seen me coming out of the law office building and asked around. It doesn't really matter. The information traveled the way information always travels in a community where everyone is connected, fast and slightly distorted, but carrying its essential truth intact. Marcus called me at 7:40 in the morning. I watched his name light up on my phone screen. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring. He called 6 more times in the next 2 hours. Then he started texting. Sarah, we need to talk. I know you're there. Please pick up. I heard about Richard. I'm so sorry for your loss. That one almost made me laugh out loud. He had never once mentioned Richard with anything approaching genuine warmth. Richard had always been, to Marcus, a wealthy, eccentric relative who might or might not be relevant depending on circumstances. Circumstances like these, apparently. Sarah, I know I made mistakes. I know I handled everything wrong. Please just let me explain. I love you. I love our baby. Can we please just talk? I'm coming over to Jenna's. That last text sent me to find Jenna immediately. She was ready. When Marcus rang the buzzer 40 minutes later, neither of us answered it. He stood outside for 22 minutes. I know, because Jenna timed it. Then he left. He called 4 more times that day. Left 3 voicemails. The voicemails were increasingly desperate. In the first one, he was controlled and apologetic. In the second one, his voice cracked. In the third one, he was crying. I listened to all of them once. Then I saved them, because my attorney would later find them useful. Then I set my phone down and went to take a nap, because I was 6 weeks pregnant and exhausted, and I had earned the right to rest. I filed for divorce in December. I had been referred to a family law attorney named Patricia Graves, who had the kind of quiet authority that made you feel certain things would be handled correctly. She had sharp eyes and sensible shoes and a way of listening to a client's situation that made you feel simultaneously understood and strategically guided. I told her everything. I showed her the iPad screenshots. The search history Marcus had accumulated weeks before I was even pregnant. The searches about work trip alibis and paternity disputes and how to legally challenge a child's parentage. Patricia looked at the screenshots for a long time. Then she looked up at me and said, "He was building a case before there was anything to build a case against." Yes. This is premeditated reputational damage to a spouse. In combination with the forced departure from the marital home while pregnant, this is a significant legal situation. She paused. In your favor. We filed the divorce papers the second week of December. Marcus was served at his real estate office, which I heard from a mutual friend he was not pleased about, but that was not something I had the energy to care about. He contested the divorce. He hired his own attorney. A man who apparently specialized in asset protection, which told me everything I needed to know about what Marcus was actually worried about. He wasn't contesting because he wanted to save the marriage. He was contesting because he had heard about the inheritance and was doing rapid calculations. The problem for Marcus was that the inheritance was mine alone, transferred directly to me, under the specific condition of independent living that I had met. It was legally airtight. Richard had been thorough, and his attorney had been thorough, and there was not a single document or clause that Marcus's attorney could find traction in. The marital home was a separate matter. Marcus's attorney argued that the marital home, which Marcus had purchased before our marriage, though we had both paid into it during our years together, was entirely Marcus's asset. Patricia presented the iPad screenshots. The judge looked at documented evidence that Marcus had been researching how to falsely position himself against his pregnant wife before the pregnancy was even disclosed. The judge looked at documentation of Sarah being effectively forced from the marital home while pregnant. The judge considered the public nature of Marcus's accusations against Sarah and the demonstrable harm to her professional and social reputation. The ruling came in March. The marital home was to be sold. The equity, accumulated during our marriage, was to be divided equally between us. Marcus did not take it well. He moved back into his mother Linda's house, which I heard about through the same network of information that had carried everything else. I allowed myself approximately 40 seconds of feeling something complicated about that before I moved on. On a warm afternoon in early April, I got the keys to Richard's coastal house. I drove there alone. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment looking at the house. White shingles, blue shutters, a wide porch that faced the water, overgrown gardens that clearly needed attention but had good bones. Richard's taste was everywhere. Books stacked in every room. A worn armchair by the window facing the ocean. Simple, quality things that had been chosen carefully and kept for a long time. I walked through every room slowly. In his study, on the desk, I found an envelope with my name on it in Richard's handwriting. Inside was a letter. 2 pages, handwritten, dated about 8 months before he passed. I won't share every word of it because some things are too personal to put on display. But I will tell you the parts that stay with me. He wrote about the first time he met me, when I was 7 years old and the family had gathered at my grandparents' house for Christmas. He said I had sat next to him at the table and asked him questions about his life with what he called real curiosity. Not the polite kind, the actual kind. He said that had stayed with him. He wrote about watching me grow up from a distance, about hearing I had become a teacher and feeling proud in a way that surprised him with its intensity. He wrote, "I have more money than I ever needed or wanted. I spent my life building things because building was what I knew how to do. But buildings don't matter the way people do. You always knew that. I watched you figure that out when you were 7 and you never forgot it." And at the end he wrote, "Whatever life sends your way, and it will send things, because it always does. I want you to know that you always deserved more than you were probably given. I hope this helps even the score a little. Use it well. Live well." That's all I ask. I sat in Richard's armchair by the window and read that letter 3 times. Then I put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in my bag and sat for a long time looking at the ocean. My son was born on a Tuesday in June at 6:22 in the morning. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Dark hair. Eyes that couldn't decide yet what color they wanted to be. Shifting between brown and gray depending on the light, which Jenna said meant he was going to be interesting. I named him Richard. Richard James. Jenna was in the delivery room with me, holding my hand through the hard parts and crying through the good parts, and taking approximately 300 photographs in the first hour of his life. When they placed him in my arms for the first time, I understood things that I had not fully understood before. About love, about purpose, about what it means to have a reason. I brought Richard James home to the coastal house, which I had spent the previous 3 months making livable and warm. Fresh paint on the walls, new curtains in the nursery, soft yellow, because I didn't know yet what color he would love, but I knew yellow was cheerful, and that seemed like a good start. The gardens were being worked on by a local landscaper who had known Uncle Richard and who teared up a little when he saw me and said Richard had been a good man. I went back to teaching in September. I had taken a meeting with the school principal over the summer and been completely honest about the pregnancy, about the divorce, about the difficult months. She was a kind woman who had known me for 7 years and who made it clear that my classroom was waiting for me whenever I was ready. I walked back in on a Tuesday morning in September to 23 new 3rd graders who looked up at me with the specific bright curiosity of 8-year-olds encountering something new. "Good morning," I said. "I'm Mrs. Calloway. This is going to be a good year." I meant it. I also established the Richard Harmon Arts Fund at the school, a dedicated endowment that paid for art supplies, music instruction, and after-school creative programs for any student who wanted them regardless of their family's financial situation. It was the kind of thing Richard would have liked. Practical. Ongoing. Actually useful. Marcus sent a letter in October. Not through his attorney. An actual handwritten letter, which surprised me enough that I opened it. He wrote that he was sorry. Not the kind of sorry that makes excuses. Or at least he tried not to. He said he had been dealing with things he hadn't told me about, pressures he had manufactured in his own mind, fears he hadn't known how to name or address. He said none of it excused what he had done. He said he knew that. He said he hoped someday I would let him be a father to Richard. Not a husband. He was clear that he understood that chapter was over. But a father. Present. Trying. I read the letter twice. Then I set it on Richard's desk, my desk now, and looked out the window at the water for a while. I thought about what I wanted. Not what was fair. Not what he deserved. Not what would satisfy the part of me that had spent months being angry and hurt and alone. What I actually wanted for my son's life. Richard James deserved to know his father. Whatever Marcus had done to me, whatever failures and paranoia and selfishness had driven his behavior, he was still biologically and legally this child's father. And children, in my experience, carry the weight of absent parents in ways that are heavy and complicated and lasting. I called my attorney. I called Jenna. I thought about it for 2 more weeks. And then I responded to the letter. I said he could meet his son. Supervised visits, to start. Structured. My terms. I said that if he proved himself consistent and trustworthy over time, we could revisit the arrangement. I said I was not forgiving what happened because the word forgiveness felt too large and too simple for something that complicated. But I was choosing to move forward. For Richard. And for myself. Because I had learned something in the hardest year of my life. Carrying anger is like carrying something too heavy for the distance you have to travel. You can do it for a while. But eventually you have to put it down. Not because the person who handed it to you deserved that grace, but because you deserve to travel lighter. I am sitting in Richard's armchair as I tell you all of this. My armchair, I should say. I'm still getting used to that. The window faces the ocean. It is late afternoon and the light is doing something extraordinary on the water. Gold and pink and a color that doesn't have a name but that you recognize immediately when you see it. Richard James is asleep in the room down the hall. He sleeps with one arm stretched above his head, which is apparently something I did as a baby too. According to my mother, who has visited 4 times since he was born and shows no signs of visiting any less frequently. My life looks nothing like I thought it would. The shape of it changed completely in the space of one terrible Tuesday night in October when I set baby shoes on a dinner table and watched my marriage dissolve in real time. But here is what I have come to understand about truth. Truth does not need you to defend it. Truth does not need you to fight for it or argue for it or prove it in advance. Truth simply exists. Patient and immovable, and if you are willing to stand next to it and wait, the rest of the world eventually catches up. Marcus demanded a DNA test because he wanted the test to confirm what he had already decided. He wanted a document that would justify what he had already done in his heart, turned away from his wife, from his marriage, from the child growing in his wife's body. Instead, the test confirmed that not only was he wrong, it confirmed that the child he had tried to disown was, medically speaking, something close to a miracle. The one thing he had been told was impossible. I don't know what Marcus has made of all of that. I suspect it is something he will spend a long time thinking about. As for me, I got my son. I got this house. I got the letter in the envelope from a quiet man who watched me from a distance for 30 years and decided I was worth something. I got my classroom back. I got my students. I got Jenna, who has been my person through the worst of it and the best of it and everything in between. And I got something harder to name but more valuable than any of it. I got clarity. I know exactly who I am now. I know what I can survive. I know what I will not accept. I know that the version of myself who set those baby shoes on that table and hoped for a different reaction. She was brave, and she was right to hope, and she deserved better. She got better. It just came from a direction she never could have predicted. If you are in the middle of your own hard chapter right now, and some of you are, I know you are, I want you to hold on to this. The test that is meant to destroy you sometimes reveals the thing that saves you instead. Be patient. Stand next to your truth. Wait. It catches up. It always catches up. My name is Sarah. My son is Richard James. We live in a house by the ocean that someone who loved us left behind. And every single day, I wake up to the sound of the water and I think, this is exactly where I am supposed to be.